Stephen, welcome to Training Magazine Network. We're delighted to turn things over to you now.
Well, thanks so much for having us, and by the way, thank you again to everyone for joining. As Gary mentioned, we tried to bring a bunch of people together to talk through a number of point of views as to why game-based training and how to do it so effectively in your organization. So we're going to do a lot of sharing of best practices and good stories with one another. Really, the purpose, just trying to advance the next slide. Let me just see if we can, there we go. In this webinar, we will be doing really a few things. We're going to talk about the importance of games. We're going to talk with Harry certainly about what Sony's been thinking about in the L&D space and how they've entered that space with Jeopardy, and obviously it's a game that a lot of people have familiarity with and have been using historically, and so what's new, and then we're going to talk with folks over at CHEST and Comcast about best practices and where they're using games overall. Just a few quick intro slides. So the game agency is 13 years old and really been focusing over the years on both creating custom training games as well as building out a turnkey solution in the form of the training arcade. People ask why games, and ultimately it comes down to a few things. It comes down to thinking about our audience, our learners, who are all incredibly distracted. In many cases, they're quite bored. They're just not stimulated, and they want feedback. And the reality is that games provides a venue to engage them on a much deeper level and turn their training from a very passive experience into potentially a much more active experience. One of the things that people ask us often is, or we hear often is, I want to use gamification, or I want to use games, and I think it's always important to stop and make sure that everyone's on the same page as to what is the difference between those two things. So we often talk about, well, game-based training, or using games themselves, it's a controlled environment. It is something that you're going to actually engage with and practice with and dive into. It's going to, it comes in many shapes and sizes, and we'll talk about a number of those, but it's something you're going to play, right? Versus gamification, which is taking some of the foundations of games, so, the goals or challenges, progress, points, badges, leaderboards, rewards, and applying it to your everyday world. And we can certainly talk about that in more detail, but for the most part, today we're going to be talking about game-based training. One of the things we will be talking about specifically with each of the presenters today is a tool called the Training Arcade. One of the things we found looking at the market a few years ago was that, and it's actually really interesting, if you look at the poll that people were taking just a few minutes ago, I was looking before we started, there's a pretty much even distribution of people who are creating games for the most part today using Captivate, Storyline, Lectora, the authoring tools overall. And there are some game mechanics in there. There's some quiz mechanics in there. But the reality is that most of the time when people are creating games in those environments, you're talking about hours and hours and hours. We've seen stats of saying upwards of 90 hours to create a really compelling game. And there are very few of us who are on this call that have that amount of time. So one of the things that we really focused on was making sure that everyone has an opportunity to use a variety of game mechanics without coding necessary and with much less time. So we created the Training Arcade about 2 years ago with that in mind. Really excited about the fact that just about a year ago we formalized a partnership with Sony and added Jeopardy to the Training Arcade. This is the only official Jeopardy training game in the world, and we're really proud of that. And we worked hand in hand with Sony to build it. And we're going to talk about that in more detail. We also are extremely excited. One of the things we were asked very early on was, can we add in an instructor mode that is really going to bring it to life in the classroom? And we've just done that. And we certainly would love anyone who's not familiar with that to give it a try. So without further ado, I want to start with Harry Friedman. I'm so excited. Our companies have been working together now, as I mentioned, for over a year, And Harry obviously is really the brains and the creative behind this property as the executive producer, both for Jeopardy as well as Wheel of Fortune. And it's been a real pleasure working with him and his team to take this from the TV environment into the e-learning and certainly digital environment. So, Harry, as discussed, I have a bunch of questions I'm hoping you and I can go through.
Sure.
And the first one is really to talk about what makes Jeopardy so successful, right? I mean, it's been 36 years. It is America's favorite show. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, thank you, and I'm delighted to be with you guys today. I think one of the reasons the show's been so successful is right there in the center of that photo, and it's Alex. I don't think his contribution. I don't think we would be where we are today without Alex. He's been the perfect host for this game. The game itself is really ridiculously simple, and it hasn't honestly changed very much since it was first introduced on NBC Daytime in 1964. It's basically categories, clues, and you respond in the form of a question. And in every episode, you have 61 opportunities to respond and maybe know something that the contestants don't, or maybe walk away having learned something. But it's what we like to say that it is reliable but never predictable.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. There's and this is actually my next question is if you can talk about the parallels certainly between the success of the television show as well as what makes successful training initiatives, right? And we'll get certainly further into Trey. I saw a comment that you made talking about PowerPoint Jeopardy versus maybe a more interactive experience. So we'll certainly get there with Harry because I think that's a really important point. But maybe we can start by just talking about the parlay of television. The comparison between what makes television shows successful and what makes training initiatives successful from your point of view.
Well, when you launch a TV show, if you're lucky, it will build an audience. That audience will become loyal. It will drive advertising revenue and return on investment for the studio. I have never seen a training game that didn't, or any sort of training that didn't sort of make me tense up because, oh my God, I have to take a test. With Jeopardy, I think the familiarity of the format breaks down those barriers. So when you're playing a training arcade version or the game agency version of Jeopardy, you already know what it's going to be about. You certainly know the subject matter, and you know you're going to play a game. It's a game, and you're going to be engaged in that game. And I think it makes people more open to learning and to engaging and to wanting to participate.
That makes a lot of sense. And just to kind of talk on top of that. We often talk about passive learning versus active learning, right? And at the end of the day, there are a few things that are more active than actually a game environment. It is the game that we all kind of played along with at home from our couches, right? So maybe we could talk about in your mind. What makes Jeopardy, beyond just being a fun game, what makes it certainly so beneficial for employee training and for knowledge assessment as well? So both
Sure.
of those.
Well, there's that natural interactivity. Any other form of programming that you might watch, drama, comedy, they're all successful shows. But you walk into a room where Jeopardy's on the screen, you are going to be engaged. You're going to be drawn into the program, and by God, whether you like it or not, you're going to stick around. The other part of it is that it has become very popular for what's now become known as co-viewing. We just used to call it family viewing, but it's something that people can engage with as they're watching together. And again, you may learn something. And one of the wonderful trends that now we're seeing is that with Jeopardy, it's cool to be smart, and it can also be very profitable to be smart. But people are also coming away with what I guess used to be known as sort of a water cooler conversation. Hey, you know what I heard on Jeopardy last night? You know what I learned on Jeopardy last night? So we're finding that people are learning, but we don't have to call it that, because that sounds so clinical. That sounds like it's too educational, but people are coming away with more knowledge and more understanding, and they also want to come back for more the next time because now they know how the game works.
And I assume they're also seeing this is part of the family viewing experience, both a competitive as well as a collaborative experience through the game. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, very much so. Very, very much so. We know of people who live, thousands of miles apart, but they will watch an episode of Jeopardy together by staying on the phone or either texting each other, and so it's yes, it's very, very much a shared experience, and certainly now with social media, it's brought a lot of viewers back to the show who might otherwise have become lapsed viewers. So again, there's that interactivity now that people are familiar with seeing Jeopardy not only on their TVs, but on their personal screens and on all of their mobile devices, all their smartphones and so on. So again, it's a very, very friendly, welcoming, familiar environment that I think promotes learning.
So with that in mind, the property's been around for 36 years. As people mentioned in the chat, there's certainly been a number of instances where people have tried to create their own via PowerPoint. I'm curious, what made you guys decide over at Sony that it was time to bring something to the market that yourselves or with a partner, and B, to take your brand, which is obviously a phenomenal brand, and put it into the hands of trainers, instructional designers to create their own content. Can you talk a little about that?
It really came down to the game agency spending the time and taking the effort to understand our viewers, understand our brand, understand how to best mold that format or actually establish a format in a way that it could be molded to any subject matter. And it was the first time we really felt like we could send our child off and it would be in good hands.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I think we're going to, first of all, if there are any questions specifically for Harry at this point, and or we can go through some specific examples. So Gary, I don't know if you want to drive any questions or if we should just keep moving forward. You tell me.
I think we give everybody an opportunity to enter any questions they have there in the chat. I'm kind of curious myself, what are some of the most common questions that Harry gets, sort of universal questions that he always gets asked? Harry?
Oh, gosh. I get asked whether or not the contestants have any advanced knowledge of the categories. They do not. In order to get on the show, you first have to sign up and take our online test, which is administered a couple times a year. If you pass that, then your name is put into a pool. We draw from that pool, and we ask you to come in for an in-person tryout where you'll have to take another test. And if you pass that one, then we give you an opportunity to play the game in a mock game setting. Because not only do you have to be smart, but you also have to be fast on that signaling button, which trips a lot of people up. But and to have that combination of both skills and traits is we're finding pretty rare.
Well, that's great, and that's, I guess, to be expected as well. DK has a question here, and says, is Jeopardy conducive to games beyond the level of information recall? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Okay, I think DK, if you can go ahead and expand on that, and we can go ahead, Stephen, and perhaps come back to Harry once DK has a chance to sort of clarify.
Yeah, and Gary, I'll weigh in on one thing on that item, or on that question. Harry may have additional point of view, but when we designed our version of Jeopardy, we wanted to make sure that it not only certainly assessed knowledge and certainly assessed someone's ability to recall, but also provided some at least additional reinforcement of the information. So one of the things that we have is you can do pre-roll videos, you can do pre-roll images, which can basically educate somebody about something, but you also can put in reinforcement points, which I think is critical for any trainers, right? And I think that combination is going to certainly play a role in slightly reinforcing the information, as well as to DK's point, test someone's ability to recall that information. Okay. Well, I'm going to keep moving forward. If there are additional questions that come in, we can certainly ask them, but I want to just be cognizant of time. I want to pass the baton really quickly over to Michael and to James, and maybe we can talk about some real examples of where they're using some of the games and what games they're using, if we can.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Stephen. So my name is Mike Sidebottom, and I work for Comcast and specifically Comcast University. And I just want to note before I kind of dive in here, it was awesome to hear Harry speak about Jeopardy, and I've watched the show for, I don't know, since I was probably 5 or 6 with my grandma, and someone as a former trainer who used to try to create and use like PowerPoint Jeopardy games, just these, I'll be nice here, but not very good, like representations of that game, as well as even the whiteboard version. Seeing Jeopardy and getting that experience inside the training arcade is really just an overall, really awesome experience. And we've had some great feedback as we've actually deployed that game recently. So a little bit about us. My guess is most of you guys are familiar with Comcast in some way, shape, or form. And it really, the reason I want to tee up Comcast here is because, we're a Fortune 50 company. We have well over 100,000 employees, across the nation, across the globe. And we support, or rather, within Comcast, we have a lot of brands, NBC, Universal Studios, Sky, Xfinity. And so working for Comcast University is really pretty amazing, just in terms of how vast this organization is, and just at the kind of the pace of innovation that it's moving at. And so our Comcast University group is really just a centralized L&D organization of about 500 people. And we support all aspects of Comcast's cable business, as well as some others. And really, the goal as Comcast University is to develop the most talented and engaged workforce that drives a truly world-class customer experience, which we are really trying to strive to make our #1 product. And our overarching strategy behind this is really pretty straightforward. It's simple, easy, and digital. And I'll circle back to that here in just a second. So as program managers for Comcast University, James and I create training programs for teams that support our residential and B2B customers with advanced data, voice, video products. And we work with business partners in pretty standard ways, which I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with, to strategize, scope, design, develop, implement, basically manage the entire training program for both new and existing programs as well. And within that, we have to be extremely agile to really meet the challenge of supporting this massive organization, which is Comcast. And again, just adapting to meet that accelerating pace of that innovation in itself is often kind of challenging. But for us, it really means thinking mobile first, introducing more gamification and game-based learning, really starting to expand into AR and VR worlds, and also beyond all that, and kind of even a step back, is really just simplifying our technologies, integrating our technologies to make sure that our learning solutions really are just simple, easy, and digital. So why games? Where do games fit in? And I'd say in probably one of the easiest ways to speak about, games really help us to stay agile and adapt to meet our learners where and how they want to be met. And games can do that by just simply boosting engagement, adding fun into a training program, which, sometimes I know we're not building training programs to be fun, but it's an amazing experience when you can, develop a training program that is, that checks all the boxes in terms of making sure it's effective and impactful, but also at the end of the day is just, fun and engaging for the learner that's in that room. So we chose to partner with the Training Arcade, really just because of their platform in general. I mean, it's super easy to use. You get multiple game types and an intuitive interface. And Stephen touched on this earlier. Prior to the Training Arcade, we had all probably had our hand in, or at some point had tried to create a game or used a template from another authoring software that was out there, and it really is a challenge, especially if you aren't familiar with said authoring software. So the fact that we can get a SME or a business partner onboarded into the Training Arcade and literally have them creating games within, say, 15 minutes is a massive win for us. Especially as we move forward and are trying to crowdsource some of these development efforts. Again, it's just an amazing platform with the high quality outputs and deployment options that we get with them. So we'll kind of touch on a couple key areas that James and myself have used Training Arcade and other games. And again, I'd say all of them really just allow us to be flexible. And so we really piloted Training Arcade about a year ago, and honestly, within probably 72 hours of getting the platform up and running, like we realized the value that it brings. And as we shared it with our colleagues, it really just kind of caught like wildfire, and all of a sudden, we're using it across multiple colleges in our L&D organization, and really starting to, again, really explore just the different ways we can integrate it in different use cases. So a couple, at least unique to me, kind of very interesting use cases for Training Arcade is we've implemented these Training Arcade games into our self-directed and kind of our hybrid self-directed programs as a stopgap. And what I mean by that kind of stopgap is we can put games after an activity or a series of activities or modules, and we can allow learners who may be consuming content at a little bit slower pace to catch up and use those games to continue engaging maybe learners who have already completed that activity to do informal review, keep them engaged, keep them learning, and it's actually worked very beautifully in our kind of hybrid, ILT/self-directed programs, and also just our truly self-directed programs. And we've also really, at least in my programs, I've really gotten into a cadence of using these instructor-led game modes at the beginning of every day of a class. And as a former trainer, I started doing that a couple years ago, and it's almost kind of funny how much people enjoy that. Like, honestly, my learners would cry and riot and demand that we play a review game at the beginning of the day, and if we didn't, there were serious consequences behind that. And so it really is even just a great way to kick off the day doing review of yesterday's content, or just kind of diving into a warm-up for what's upcoming, just to kind of get everyone grounded and prepared for that day's content. So I want to go ahead and pass it off to my colleague, Mr. James Pappas, here to run through some of his use cases and talk a little bit more about just, again, some of the value that we've realized from the Training Arcade.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael, and really excited to be here as part of this presentation. And as Michael said, as introduced, I work with Michael as well in supporting Comcast and Comcast University in supporting our employees and delivering this really unique, really fun method of content delivery. So as Michael shared, you can obviously hear that Training Arcade and the way that we deliver games is very flexible, and that's a huge benefit of it. And before I jump into the different ways that we use training, I just want to reinforce and reevaluate and level set what exactly we're solving for as we use these games in our training. So we deliver games with targeted questions to reinforce our learning content. We use these games to drive learner engagement and interactivity through a gamified learning solution. And then we also use it to reinforce our content through a repeatable model that allows for a growth of catalog of games that can be utilized as just-in-time learning. So as Michael referenced, using the games as needed, as a stopgap, as a reinforcement, to really enhance our learning and provide that break in the knowledge, just a new way, an engaging way to deliver our content. That's really proven to be successful so far. So going into that, and I'll touch a bit more on the different modalities of learning that we utilize, whether that be self-directed or instructor-led, as Michael touched on. Just want to highlight, obviously, the Jeopardy game as Mr. Friedman showed up and talked through and really did a great job explaining, and you all see how robust it is and how excellent it is to use in our training. We view Jeopardy as a comprehensive reinforcement of our content within a given learning program or training. So we'll use other different types of training arcade games, whether that be a jump or match game, as more of an introduction into our content. And then leading up and playing those games, when you get to a Jeopardy game, it's really that comprehensive reinforcement because it's really robust, it's really easy to play, very simple, but also super engaging. And so we've used it in that format, and it's really proven to be a really big hit with our trainers and our employees, and a model that we're going to continue to implement. So moving forward, I did want to touch on the different modalities that we've been using on it. So it's, as Michael touched upon, it's instructor-led, it's self-directed, and it's also in our group and huddle formats, which is also leader-led. So to start off with our instructor-led training, this is where we have programs that are in learning content, where we have instructors obviously facilitating learning programs with a bunch of our employees. And a specific example of how we implemented Training Arcade within our instructor-led format is for our business partners who are offshore, nearshore, and onshore business partners who support Comcast. We implemented about 14 games, Training Arcade games, within a 5-week instructor-led program in a site in the Philippines. So obviously very exciting to see the global reach that this is having. So we implemented these games and we targeted the content around our quality program, which, just to give some context behind, focuses on a specific set of behaviors that we train our employees on to make the customer experience rather a lot better and a lot more concise in making sure that the customer experience is as fluid and as the best experience that our customers can have. So we implemented these games into our business partner site in the Philippines and had them within the first 3 weeks of this training to really get it started off, to start off the training and really have it be an exciting and an impactful beginning of learning. And the feedback that we heard has been extremely positive, with learners expressing excitement over the unique, engaging content, as well as an increased retention and application of our quality content throughout their learning journey. I think one of the biggest takeaways that we've had is seeing not only the engagement piece, which is really self-evident within this application, it's really how our learners and our employees are taking away this learning and applying it elsewhere, and that's really where the significant impact is being seen. Similar impact is being seen in our self-directed training, which, as Michael touched upon, allows for our learners to take their learning at a more self-paced environment. And similar to how what Michael prefaced with, it allows our learners, if learners are going ahead of others, or if some learners are lagging behind, in some cases, or in most cases, those learners can retake these games, reinforce the learning within those games that we deliver, and also foster that competitive spirit, which has also been a huge piece of feedback that we've gotten as we've implemented this content. And then just to wrap up on the modality piece, in our huddle sessions, this is more of, I guess you could say, like an informal training as opposed to the instructor-led or the self-directed training programs, which are obviously very formal and speak to a schedule. The leader-led huddles are more in this group format and similar, obviously, again, to what Michael referenced, having that instructor-led delivery of it, where a trainer or facilitator or leader, rather, in this case, would deliver a game and then use a prompt for our learners to play the game. And in this group session, learners would be playing, let's say, a Jeopardy game, and it really the environment within the huddle, you're going through a whole day of content. Obviously, you're learning a lot of critical information. And that competition really shines through as the learners are going through this huddle environment. And obviously, the feedback that I'm getting, and what's really exciting about it, is that even though the modalities are different, we're seeing the same exact feedback of that it's very well received, it's increasing our knowledge, retention, and application, and our learners want more, and that's something that we keep hearing is like, when's the next game, when's the next game? So it's really, really exciting. So going off of some specific examples of the different modalities that we've implemented, why we like using Training Arcade, and I've touched on this a bit as well as has Michael. It's encouraging that engagement and interactivity. It's fostering that competition among our learners. It's increasing knowledge retention and application, and again, providing that unique content delivery method. And in addition to this, it's the fact that just gamification as a whole, games play into a learner's basic needs, and they encourage ongoing engagement. Learners participate in gamified experiences for similar reasons. Challenge is exciting, and the validation of gaining points, of doing better than someone else in a certain game, it gives you that sense of pride, and pride is really what it is in your work, aside from the knowledge that you need to do your job successfully. So it's really been, for these reasons and more, Training Arcade has been a huge boost to our learning programs across all of our modalities and work streams. And so just to wrap it up, future plans with Training Arcade, one of the game types that we have available to us is that scenario game that we're going to utilize within a branching capacity. And what's really going to be awesome about this is that when we utilize the scenario-based game, it's going to allow us, at least within our purposes, to sample call clips. And what's going to be really unique about this content delivery is that we can include sample call clips. And if a learner gets, they'll hear a portion of a call clip, get a chance to ask a question, or answer a question rather, of how they think the call will go moving forward. Based on how they answer, if they answer correctly, they'll move forward on the correct path. But the critical piece comes in of, if they get the answer incorrectly, they'll be able to hear how that conversation will go, and they won't have to do it in a live customer environment. So what this will allow for is allowing our learners who take these scenario-based games to potentially avoid having these situations arise in real customer scenarios and with real live customers. So it's really going to be a huge boost and increase the customer experience, which is really where we want to get to. So, and then obviously there's a continuation expansion of game-based learning that we're going to continue, Michael and I are going to continue to use across Comcast University as we move forward. So that's, as a whole, what we've been doing here for Comcast. Again, it's really been a huge benefit to our learning content, and I'll pass back to Stephen for, as we want to move forward, or any questions we want to field for Michael or I. Or to Gary, if we want to move forward. Just want to check on next.
No, I see that. I see that Stephen has come back in, and so I just need to boost him up to prepare him, to promote him a little bit, and then he'll be able to do that. Somebody had some questions about seeing examples, by the way, and we're preparing possibly to be able to share some samples with you at the end of the webinar.
Okay.
And
hey,
Stephen,
can you hear me now?
There you go. Yeah, I sure can.
Okay, super. So, Michael and James, thank you so much. I appreciate it. So next up, certainly, Christina Lorenzo has a very, very different story, and while Comcast is obviously focused on a number of different stakeholders on the learner side, Christina and CHEST, for that matter, are a little more focused on one audience, and Christina, I was hoping maybe you can talk a little about CHEST, certainly your role there, and you know, what you're focused on, certainly from a games training standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephen. I just wanted to say, first off, thank you for having me, and thank you, Training Magazine Network and Gary, for hosting today. So again, my name is Christina Lorenzo. I am a senior e-learning instructional designer at CHEST. CHEST is the American College of Chest Physicians. It's a bit of a mouthful, but what we are is a subspecialty medical society that focuses on 3 branches of medicine: pulmonary, sleep, and critical care medicine. We are both a community for doctors as well as a place for doctors to stay up to date on their education in chest medicine. With that, we offer many modalities of education, including live learning hands-on courses, an annual meeting conference that's coming up next week, as well as online courses and games. And that's what gets into my role here at CHEST. I am an instructional designer that designs and develops the games and the online courses with a team of 2 other instructional designers.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your learners overall. Obviously, it's a focused audience, but maybe you can help us understand who they are a little bit better.
So Steve, it totally is a focused audience. They are doctors and allied health professionals. So if you've ever been a patient and go to the doctor, you know that their primary focus is caring for their patients. Many of our chest doctors have very complex patients with complex journeys. They spend a lot of time entering information into medical charts. They also, unfortunately, have very long hours. They also do procedures, and they're on call on the weekends. But conversely, they're high performers. They're some of the top in the field. And with that, as a learner, they have short attention spans, and they really have less time for learning than they'd really like. And there is an exponential amount of medical information out there that they need to keep on top of to ensure that their patients get the best care. But all of this really sometimes leads to stress and burnout within our field.
So I do have a question. Given that profile, they are being pulled in 1,000 directions, and they have a lot of information that they're being asked to look at. Why game-based training versus other modalities? Can you talk a little about that?
Absolutely. So game-based training is an escape from this reality that I'm talking about. And in that escape, they're able to have fun and engage in the content and kind of turn off everything else that's happening outside of it. It's also a safe place for them to practice and fail. We certainly want to make sure that they care for the patient in real life to the best of their ability. So we need them to have a place where they can experiment and try new things in a game space. Also, games are naturally designed to provide visual information, and so it goes into those dual channels of processing information, which is excellent for them to be able to achieve, to obtain more content in a shorter period of time. The games that we design are typically bite-sized in the amount of content that we offer. They're usually highly, highly specialized and focused content, as well as lasting about 5 to 10 minutes at a time. But we find that the games, the mechanics that we use, for example, the jump game, it's very addictive. So our learners come back to play again and again, just cementing the knowledge that they're obtaining in these games. Finally, our games, both our games online and, oh, go ahead, Stephen.
No, keep going. Sorry. My apologies, Christina.
Yeah, so the last thing I was going to mention is competition, because this is really important within this field of learners. So our doctors are naturally competitive. So as soon as we put a scoring system in our games and we put a leaderboard and we attach prizes to it, we are going to drive engagement in those games.
So there are a few things that you mentioned here that we hear from a lot of partners. One is certainly the bite-sized component, right? It's something we all hear more and more is that everyone wants micro content. Also, the fact that it's competitive, we see that as a result of it being bite-sized and whether it's intrinsic or extrinsic motivations, people are coming back more and more. One of the things I talk about a lot is that with the average training session, it's pretty rare that someone comes back and says, "Gosh, I'd like to take that a few more times." Are you finding that with the games that people are proactively coming back, or that you are or that you are pushing them to come back? Can you talk a little about any particular examples of that?
Absolutely, Stephen. So 2 examples that come to mind is one, thinking back to what Michael and James were talking about. They were mentioning learning that meets them when and where they want to learn. This is the case for our learners. And games that are on a mobile platform that are shorter games can meet a doctor who's, in between caring for patients, walking up to a patient's bedside, and they need to practice a new technique or reinforce some information. They can jump into that game or that piece of training right there and then where they want to learn. And then the competition, I have several examples regarding the competitive nature, because these games, exactly. You wouldn't imagine that people would be spending hours playing them, but we get that. So specifically, I think back to our last annual meeting that we hosted, we had a learner who figured out the URL to one of our jump games in sleep medicine. He took the game home at night and played it on his own personal computer, and to get the highest score. And so when we came back in the morning, we found that this learner had been engaged all night trying to get the highest score. And truly it's because he's a high achiever, and it wasn't the prize that was attached to it.
And that's really common, and obviously we say that with our games, but I think that that's a common theme with games, period. As long as they're a compelling experience, you're going to get someone to spend a lot more time with your content, whether it's on their own time, whether it's in the classroom. It's definitely a theme. So you have obviously a lot of tools at your disposal. We started working with you about a year ago. But we know that you've done a lot with games. I'm curious what you like about the training arcade, and how you're using it most effectively.
Yeah, so the training arcade, the first thing that comes to mind is that there is a variety of games. When we first went into the training arcade, maybe it was almost 2 years back, before we started a partnership and customizing games. When we first started looking at the off-the-shelf ones, we immediately were attracted to them because, like I mentioned, we have a small team of instructional designers, so we don't have a lot of bandwidth for developing very robust games from the ground up. And so these off-the-shelf ones allow for rapid development. I have a screenshot here that shows that you can make some simple modifications, just plugging in information for each question right there. And so the development is super easy. Also, they're mobile. All the games are optimized for mobile, which is perfect for our doctors who are looking to play games on their phone versus sitting on a computer. And finally, we can see those internal results of what's happening. Just like with that jump game, and we found out that morning, we saw that night that our learner had been in there all night playing. And so we can watch internally and see what's happening and make adjustments. We can pull questions out because medical content is changing every few months. And so we need to constantly be able to update. And so the Training Arcade offers a place for us to rapidly develop and then be responsive to the results we're getting from the players.
Can you, and you and I have not actually talked about this as much, so I don't mean to put you on the spot, but because the slide showcases analytics, can you talk a little bit about analytics? How important are they to you as a trainer, and how are you using them, certainly as you think about your training overall?
Yeah, so the first thing that's really important for us at CHEST is that our education is accredited, which means that our doctors can get continuing medical education credits to ensure they stay up to date and licensed. So with accreditation, we need to report out all the education that's happening, whether it's in a course or it's in a game. So having this dashboard at our fingertips allows us to export these numbers and share them with the Accreditation Council. And that's one of a really high priority for us. Another thing is looking at, like I mentioned, we can make changes on the fly. So we can go into the dashboard and find out maybe one game is being more successful. If we're comparing two games next to each other, we can look at the numbers. We can look at the length, the average duration, how long they're spending in there, and so we can make decisions which game we want to bring to a live session, which game we want to continue to build out. We can make changes to our games just by comparing that data. And then finally, like I had mentioned, we talked about how medical information changes. Sometimes the information doesn't change, but the questions change. So we find out that we wrote a bad question, and that maybe everybody's getting the question right, or everybody's getting the question wrong, or they're spending way too much time on it. So we have an opportunity when we clean up our games, we have an opportunity to dive right into the dashboard, and that helps us zoom in on where we should clean up our games.
I think that's a really key point. One of the things that comes up, whether you're talking about the branching dialogue or Jump or back to Jeopardy, a lot of the games that people create on their own really don't have that level of analytics. And I think, it's our point of view over at the Game Agency in the Training Arcade that it's important to think about that user knowledge as well as that user behavior and make sure that it is impacting your overall training. So I encourage everyone to think about that very much so. I'm curious if you can talk. So you've mentioned obviously a few different games that you've done. If maybe you could talk about which games you use for what. In particular, Dr. Neb, which we're showing here, is one that I know that our team has spent a lot of time with you guys on. Could you kind of give some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So examples, Jeopardy, of course. Jeopardy is something that we just got to play, the instructor-led version. We played it internally with our staff, and we love it. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to roll it out soon in our live sessions. And I know that faculty, doctors who teach, that they're going to be really interested in that. So I know that's kind of looking forward. But Jeopardy, we also did a version of Jeopardy as well, the one that's just directed by the learner themselves. That's been successful. Jump, we had many iterations of Jump. That one seems to be the most addictive so far. So we continue to put out different channels of content for that game. And then finally, Dr. Neb, which I'm going to dive into more. Dr. Neb, which stands for Nebulizer, is a customized game using the scenarios template. So about maybe a year back, we had come across this new content. So there was new information out there on COPD, which is a lung disease treatment. And we could either give the doctors a 20-page guideline pamphlet and say, read this pamphlet and then go out and apply it on your patients. Or we could engage them in a game over a series of different cases and see how they react to that and if they're able to absorb the information better. So we knew that we needed to have something that was more engaging than just a Jump game, for example. So Jump, we don't have a journey. There's no progression because it randomly goes from one question to the next. For the scenarios game, it automatically felt like a good fit because it was going to be continuous, and we wanted to match the actual patient journey that would be continuous as well.
I appreciate that. I'm curious, can you talk certainly about branching paths overall, because that's obviously what you've used Dr. Neb for. What's that experience been like, and how are you using branching paths from an educational standpoint?
Yeah, this is a really important question, Stephen. So for all of the listeners out there, if you haven't gone into the Training Arcade, when you do, you'll find out that scenarios, when you get in there, you're going to find out scenarios is going to take a little bit more time for developing, but the reward is going to be great. So there was a question, I think DK had a question, and I think about, Jeopardy, if that would be the best used game for this, but I think scenarios might be the answer for you. And the reason is because scenarios allows for soft skills, for deductive reasoning, communication skills, you have a series of scenes that get played, and then the learner is prompted to answer a question that drives from one scene to the next. And so they're building upon their learning as they go, and then they get to see the consequences of their answer choices. As well, this kind of mimics this has a very simulation feel to it, so it's mimicking an actual patient case and a patient story. And the content that we use to create Dr. Neb was actual content that the doctors in the field commonly see, and they were thinking and calling upon their memories of interacting with patients when they built this out. And then finally, some of those gamification features we attached to it was the scoring to help drive kind of to cue the learner that they were going down the right path or the wrong path. And then it was important that we customized it and we added rationales, because it's really important for our doctors to know when they choose an answer that's not ideal, they need to know the rationale, the evidence-based rationale, why that wasn't the right answer.
So one of the questions, Christine, I see pop up is by Ken. He's asking certainly if Dr. Neb is more narrative or more of a game. I'll give my point of view, and I would love you to give yours as well. I think it's a combination. It by all means is very much puts you into the user experience and has you trying out different techniques, but it has a few things that I think are certainly game related, right? It's going to have a toggle of sorts which will give you a sense as to your performance. Are you progressing to where you need to go, or are you going further and further away? It has a point system as well, and it has feedback along the way, and I think that all those really make it more of a simulation game, which if you think about some of the popular simulations out there, those use just the exact same techniques. But I'm hoping maybe you, from your point of view, if you could kind of answer that question as well.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you that it's a mix of both. So it definitely has, it's case-based first, which is what our learners need. But it does have that scoring system involved with it. Now we had to kind of fudge the scoring system. There's really no right or wrong answer. So it was what was the best choice versus the least best choice. It had different scoring attached to it. But I think where we tried to play up the gaming was that the experience was very immersive. We had custom art design that was very engaging. We used character art. We used, our script has some really funny things sprinkled into it, and I think because the doctors who helped us create the content were in the mindset that this was a game, they kind of, they took down their armor and their very professional nature, and they kind of were like, okay, let's make this a game, let's make this fun. And by automatically thinking, hey, we're building a game, the doctors who built the content were able to shift into that mindset and make sure that it was fun and engaging. And so I think that it kind of, which came first, whether it became a game or it started out as a game and became more simulation, that's really blended.
So I see that MM asked a really important question, as if she was cued to do so, or he or she was cued to do so. The question is, do you let them go down the wrong path, or do you correct them right away? There's obviously many ways of approaching this. Can you talk certainly about the logic that you guys have taken with the branch for this game? And certainly I can add in on what others are doing as well.
Absolutely. So to MM's point about letting them go down the wrong path, we do let them go down the wrong path, but then we put them back on the right path. And the way we do that is by choosing the logic called branching, parallel branching. So in true branching, we start out with like an analogy of a tree, and it has the branches, and there's these infinite possibilities of endings, and it's very nonlinear, it's exploratory, it's choose your own adventure. But as you know, if you're a small team, you don't have the production resources to build a true branching game. So instead, you choose parallel branching. And that's one reason to choose it, and the other one is because of MM's question. Because, yes, we let them go down the wrong path, but we want to ensure that they ultimately land on the key learning points. So if you can see in this diagram, this is a kind of an interpretation of what parallel branching is. So we start out at A, and then there are these three parallel branches. There's B, C, and D. And the learner can choose to go down B, C, or D, and then they're all in parallel. So let's say B was the best choice to go down. They're still going to end up at E. The same if the learner went down D and that was really not the best choice, and they're going to end up at E as well. And then at that point, that's where information is going to be reinforced about kind of recapping what was important and what happened with the patient. And we designed the script around that to make sure that the script wraps up and then hits that point E. So maybe, for example, you gave the patient medication B, or you gave the patient, you assigned them pulmonary rehab, you might find out that the consequences were ultimately the same and the patient's coming back for another follow-up visit because they were progressing worse. So in this way, it helps ensure the patients who go down the wrong path hit those teaching points. It also helps with us writing scripts to make sure that our scripts don't become endlessly complicated, and it keeps everything simplified.
It's worth mentioning, you asked certainly, can you?
So,
Stephen, were you speaking up? We couldn't quite hear you.
What? Yeah, so I don't know if you can hear me now, but to answer your question, and I'm sorry, audio is popping in and out for me, but you can reverse decisions. Sorry, I should say you can't reverse decisions, but you can, from a path design standpoint, you can write the path to go any way, shape, or form. I happen to really like the logic that Christina and her team took with this, but the tool itself is incredibly flexible in allowing you to design it to allow the learner to go any way that they want. So I think we have maybe 2 or 3 more slides. Christina, I was wondering if maybe you can just talk super quickly about success, and this goes back to analytics.
Sure.
What was success
well,
for you guys?
The success, we launched the game in April. I'm going to talk a little bit faster for the sake of time for everyone dropping off. But we launched in April. We added, during the soft launch, we had an iPad and asked some questions directly to learners. We found out that, yes, they strongly agree that game-based learning is preferred over lecture-based. That was really happy to hear from our doctors. And also the overall rating, they evaluate Dr. Neb to be both above average and some excellent. So overall, there was a really positive uptake of Dr. Neb, which was good for us. But they did give us some critical feedback on ways to make changes, and we're always looking to be innovative and update our content. So we took back some pointers, add some voiceover to it. Even if they're on mobile phones, they would prefer that. So there's different things we could do to continue to improve it. But I think overall, it was a success, and we're hoping to continue to expand it. Our audience for the moment was just for doctors, but I would love to expand it to allied health professionals. Respiratory therapists are really big in the world of COPD care, and so their ability to engage in this material as well is very important for ensuring the patient gets the best care.
So I'm going to do this one last slide, and then I know we need to do a real wrap-up real quick.
Yeah, so in addition to expanding out Dr. Neb, we're hoping to have a centralized location where all of our learners can come and play together and compete online. I think that this would be an extremely valuable way to engage our learners all year round.
We'll certainly go into that in more detail. That's something that we're working on with CHEST and a few other clients, which is and actually Comcast as well, which is a hub for people to play. I do want to make you guys aware of an offer for everyone who's attended this. Anyone who wants to do a trial of the Training Arcade and ultimately wants to use the Training Arcade for life, we have a promo code that really allows you to get the 8 games, but also gives you an unlimited number of admins for as long as you're using the platform. So that is a pretty substantial value. Please feel free to use this code and/or send us any questions that you have. But I'm going to move this back over to Gary.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen, and Harry, and Christina, and Mike, and everybody that's been involved. Thanks so much for putting this together, and thanks to all of you who have attended. If you folks have a few minutes, if our participants, our members have a few minutes, actually, Christina has agreed to do a little bit of a kind of an impromptu demo. Christina, are we still of a mind to do that?
Oh, absolutely. Based upon the questions here, I think that I'll be able to answer some more of them if we take a deep dive into Dr. Neb.
Great. Well, I'm going to do something here we didn't prepare for, so if it goes south on us, well, then everybody will understand. But we'll go ahead and add another pod here, and Christine, I'll just walk you through this. Even though we didn't test, it should be there shouldn't be a reason why this wouldn't work for you. So we're just going to show your desktop. And if you want to click the share my screen, and now you need to click another thing that says start sharing. Did you click the second thing?
I did. One moment.
Okay. There we go. Yeah, good. We can all see that. And just a note for everybody, if you look up in the upper right-hand corner of that pod there, you'll see 4 arrows that are going away from the center, right? If you click that, that'll make it full screen for you. You're welcome to do that. And then you just click the same icon when Christina is done to bring it back to the state that it's in now. So Christina, go right ahead.
Okay, and Gary, you're going to guide me when I'm ready to exit, right? And you're going to prompt if there are questions that come up? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right.
All right, so here's the introduction slide. This is one of the scene 3 of 4 different scenes across this patient journey in Dr. Neb. There's some overview here of what's happening in the scenarios template. So we have the meter, the clarity meter. We have the history. They can actually track what's happened. This is really important for our doctors to ensure that they can see what choices they made and why they got there. And then the continue button, of course. Here's a little introduction. Dr. Mendez, he's going to meet this patient for the first time. We went with the comic book style for this game, and that's mostly one to add some personality to all of our patients and characters and doctors. The second is because this is kind of a text-heavy game, which you'll find, and so the text bubbles and the dynamicness of text is difficult to achieve, and so by using the comic style, help add more of that. So they're having a pretty typical conversation. Go ahead, Stephen, was that you?
That was me, but I didn't have anything to say.
No, not me.
So Stephen, I don't know if you want to, elaborate a little bit on, any of the choices as well that you had seen your team on your end when we did this partnership, but feel free to add in.
Yeah, well, I will say that you have a few options when using scenarios. You can do what CHEST has done here, which is to build custom animations. You can also use other products out there that have more off-the-shelf, whether it's products like Beyond or Powtoon. You can work with some of the templates that eLearning Brothers has, whether it be for stock images. There's a lot of options here. You can do video. I really love the design that they did here, and I think that it is it feels very inviting, and certainly it keeps people engaged.
Yeah, and so here we're at a point where the learner is able to make a decision. Now this one's a bit of a doozy, and so when you look through the choices, some of them are clearly more right than others. We could choose the wrong one. No, I'm not sure whether respiratory therapist was measuring your oxygen. Clearly the wrong choice. But then this is going to trigger so we have a rationale that pops up here. It's never appropriate to not measure. It's just letting you know, hey, don't forget that. Here they're going to move on. They're going to reiterate this text. We had gone back and forth in the design thinking about how we wanted to, how much of the content we wanted to reinforce and replay and how much we wanted to cut back. But we thought it was still important for the character, for the choice to be put back into the character's mouth. And then here they're just going to start going, down a conversation path. Once they get into here, it's going to start to branch. Now, I don't know how much further we're going to go to the point where we're going to hit a point where there's a key shared decision. But there was a question before that asked if there's kind of any going in reverse. And yes, the way we did reverse was that we had some of these questions, I'm going to click through, some of these questions actually would trigger, when they clicked it, it would trigger them to go back down a different path. And so when you're in the development side of this, which I'm working on today, you'd be able to pick exactly where, when they click on this specific answer choice, where this would bring them. And it could bring them onto a different path or even back to the beginning. So that's pretty much it for showing a little snippet of what we did with Dr. Neb and how we transformed it into our own customized game that was truly patient story-based. Gary, I think I'm done sharing my screen here.
Okay, great. You can. I will actually stop it for you, and so you don't have to worry about that. And we do have a question by WLF. Oh, I'm sorry, Stephen. Go ahead.
No, we're on the same page. I was just about to answer that. So, yeah, the nice thing is whether it is in scenarios or it is any of the other games, we're tracking a tremendous amount of data on the user. So, not only completion and what their scores are, but how they're answering every single question. If they're answering it many times, how they're answering each go round. So, yeah, there's a lot of data which we're tracking. It's available. Certainly, what can be transferred via SCORM or XAPI, we transfer that way. We also have an analytics dashboard which you can export any data in any format, a CSV, Excel, so on.
Okay, and now, Stephen, there's another question there too. I don't know if you saw that from Sharon, and she wanted to know, or no, I'm sorry, it's from WLF again. Can Training Arcade be integrated with existing LMSs?
It can. So there are a number of ways. We do support a number of SCORM packages, so you can certainly export any game as a SCORM package and just plug it right into your platform. If you are building a course in any of the major authoring tools, you can embed it into those authoring tools as a web object. We also allow for web embeds. So there's a embed code that you can do. We've basically tried to make this as plug and play as possible, and it plays really nicely with really only any LMS out there. The last question is whether we can show the jump game. Well, you know what I will do is, if people want to stay, I'm happy to do that. Or Jen, do you want to just grab one and we can put it in here as an example? But we can certainly show that as well. Gary,
yeah, we're running out of time, but because we have another webinar to do. But do you have a link to it that you can put in the chat, or is this something you want to do a screen share on?
We can sure do that. So
there.
Asking. Oh, there we go. So here's an example. Here's an example of a jump game. I encourage people to come to the website. We have examples of all 8 games that are in here. Someone asked earlier how many games there are. There are 8 now. We have a 9th coming out, and we have a roadmap.
And I'll go ahead and
come. So definitely.
And Stephen, I'll go ahead and launch the page for Training Arcade on everybody's desktop to make it that much easier to get there. Or you can just go to trainingarcade.com if for some reason that's blocked for you all. What else do we need to cover, Stephen, before we wrap it up?
No, I think we've really hit a lot of the points. Certainly encourage you guys to play around with the tool, and I really appreciate everyone's time. And if there are any questions, the tool aside, if there are any questions that you guys are thinking about, what's the best strategy based on different learning or performance objectives? What's the best thing for you to do as you're playing with game creation, either in our tool or others? We're always happy to answer it. We love this stuff, and certainly would love the opportunity to.
And Stephen, I've gone ahead and put your email address there on the screen, along with your slide. So I think that we've pretty much answered all the questions and gotten a lot of great information today. Encourage everybody to go to thetrainingarcade.com, and I would go there before you vote for the Training Magazine Network Choice Awards. You might find that the Training Arcade is one of your favorite solution providers. So please do that, and then do vote. You have until the end of October. So thank you to Training Arcade and the Game Agency, and to all of our speakers, and to Jennifer especially for all her great help in pulling this together. Any final words, Stephen?
Well, just thank you very much to the Training Magazine. We appreciate you guys hosting us and appreciate everyone attending. This is a
You're welcome.
So
enjoyed it.
Thank you, Harry.